until I was 14, I lived in West Africa. I don't think I've ever met a bi black guy. No, it's illegal there, so I guess I wouldn't be going there soon.
I'm from Ghana, and it's kind of those quite stereotypically African in the way in which just being queer is just not accepted, like it's not okay. I remember when I was in Ghana actually, because I went to school there for 2 years. Like I left here, went to school there for 2 years, and I was watching this like news program with my family, and they had like a segment on like lesbians and women who like other women, and so they said the most ridiculous thing. It was like, oh yeah, lesbians have high risk of breast cancer due to sucking each other's breasts. Like what? And I remember sitting there, especially like, you know, being like 13 and definitely knowing that you like girls. I was like, what? So like, I like boobs, does that mean I'm going to get breast cancer?
In the Indian community, I think it's frowned upon. I think it's only just recently that more and more men are coming out. It was almost taboo those days, and so I was one of them perhaps who decided to be more overtly heterosexual, but covertly homosexual as well.
If I'm filling in a government form or other things, I usually say I'm bisexual. Usually I identify as queer, but I kind of use both labels. I'm non-binary, mixed race. I'm an immigrant, and I feel like I'm in between. I have a lot of social statuses that are sort of in between, liminal.
I'm a minority in a minority in a minority.
Queerness in the black community is very untalked about. It's something that, you know, we're kind of, it's really difficult to kind of navigate and difficult to open up to people about. I don't necessarily feel comfortable in all white spaces, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable in like all black spaces because of my queer identity. So it's just a really weird thing that you have to balance. And all my queer friends also happen to be white as well, so that's kind of just how it plays out, where you just associate queerness with essentially whiteness. And I think it's maybe unintentional, but it's just a sort of thing that happens in terms of representation of queer people of colour is almost non-existent unless it fits into very stereotypical sort of racial tropes of that overly flamboyant queer man or that overly butch queer woman. Never like a femme bisexual who's just kind of going about life, you know, just doing her thing.
Growing up in the 70s, black boys or black men are treated very differently than black women and black girls by society in general and by other black people. And being a black girl, it meant I was like bottom of the barrel, nobody could give a toss. There are a few more by celebrities, but it feels very that white people are still benefiting from this. White bisexual people are going to probably think, yeah, things are a lot better, but for bi people of colour, I think it's not much has changed from 10, 20 years ago.
I don't think I could ever come out to my parents. I don't even know how that conversation would work. We kind of just have this don't ask, don't tell thing that we just kind of go about life, and usually when they say something like that is homophobic, I will correct them, and they've learned not to say things around me, but usually they just think that's because I do sociology and I'm like really passionate about queer politics, rather than actually your daughter is really, really gay. My mum's very overdramatic, and she's this lovely small woman who's just overdramatic about life. And she came up to me and she was like, oh my God, Khadija, like the worst thing happened to me today and I'm so confused, I don't know how to feel about it. And she was like, and I was like, okay, like what's going on? She was like, I feel like I can talk to you about this because you like this sort of thing, you know this sort of thing. And I was like, what, mum? And she was like, one of my friends, she told me she was a man. And I was like, what? And she's like, she said it, she's a woman, but she told me she was a man. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, and she was like, she's a woman though, Khadija. She's like, she's a woman. And I was like, oh, you mean she's like trans? She was like, yeah, I think so. And she was just in this state of frenzy because she had known this woman her whole life to be like a woman, and I think she's from like Thailand or something. And then like her friend, who's a very close friend, finally came out to her about being trans, and she just was really confused. And she's like, what do I say to her? Like, do I still say her? Do I say he? And I was like, you say her. And she was like, are you sure? Because I don't want to hurt her feelings, but I don't know what she... And I was like, she's a she. And then she was like, okay. And then I took time to kind of explain to her like how like gender isn't really a binary. And I spoke to her about like our like indigenous cultures, because we have indigenous cultures in my country that don't necessarily identify with any sort of distinct gender. And relating it back to that kind of indigenous culture, like, oh mum, there's some people who don't actually believe man and woman are things that really exist. They kind of just are people, and that's just how they see life. And I explained to her how actually culturally the notion of the gender binary is a very Western thing, and it's something that was imposed to us through colonialism. And then she was like, okay, she was like starting to sort of get it based on like indigenous cultures and the practices that we have. And she was like, oh, but like it's still difficult. So, and she was like, but that's really mean then, isn't it? And I was like, yeah, mum, it is kind of mean. She's like, because we just tell children that they're this thing, and then what if they're not? And I was like, there you go. You've got it.
I think some people would find being constantly questioned or constantly being understood to be different things depending on who was looking and who was asking. I think some people would find that sort of cool or freeing or liberating. But mostly I think it just makes me feel a bit tired.
And I was like basically hated and scorned upon because of my skin or my heritage or because of my sexuality and my sexual preference. You can't really hide your race. I can't hide that I'm black. I can't hide it. But with my sexuality, I could if I wanted to.
Even if people take all the other sort of like queer, punk rock, you know, generally down with liberation tick boxes, you know, we condemn racism in other countries and stuff, you know, a lot of the time it gets to that point where, oh, but if it comes down to someone confronting us about our own privilege, oh no, we can't have that, we can't have that. Racism is other people.
It's tricky when being on things like, OK Cupid, get loads of messages from mainly straight white guys. Because I'm black, because I've got big tits, then automatically I'm going to be Femi Wonder, and I'm going to, you know, just make all their unicorn dreams come true. And they don't see me as me, they don't ever read a profile or anything. And then I'll get stuff like, which is, things like hello chocolate as a first line, or hello big mama. I mean, society is generally racist and generally fatphobic as well. And when queerness mixed with that, there's very few people that are interested. Younger black people are often portrayed as sort of sexually exotic and, you know, we're up for anything. And bi people are also often seen as sexually adventurous, hence all the threesome requests. So when you put that together, it's just like, oh God, you know, leave me alone, stop it. And some things that have come out from the report is that people being groped, which has happened to me, and unfortunately people being sexually assaulted, because just, we're supposed to be up for everything, and how dare we not?
I'm quite like a hypersexual looking person, and I'm black, so that already adds connotations of hypersexuality. And then usually, like, I'll be talking to a bunch of guys or whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah, so I'm into girls, I'm into like whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, so like threesomes, and I'm like, no.
Sometimes it's easier online, at least partly because you can kind of try and weed out the creepy fetishists and people who are problematic in other ways. I'm vaguely open to straight people, but I think I feel safer dating queer people, and then people who, you know, explicitly mention intersectionality or sort of other things in their profile that make me think that, you know, they might be a bit safer.
There are people who will fetishize you, so they basically just see you as a penis, basically. That's all they see is cock. But there's those people who have a preference, and that's the problem. It's like there's a fine line between having a preference for something and having a fetish for something. You hook up with someone on Tinder, and the first line they say to you is, oh, have you got a big black cock? Are you quite dominant? Are you quite this and quite that? So it's almost like there's a lot of emphasis on almost like black stereotypes in terms of being black and a thug. No blacks. It's harsh. You're thinking, but I'm quite nice. But fair enough. You don't want. Again, is that a preference, or are you a racist? If I sit there, I don't want to sit there wasting time worrying about it. Oh my God. Because I know there's beautiful people I can meet. But it's the indirect racism as opposed to blatantly overt racism.
I've gone to gay pubs in the middle of Soho, and I've been stopped and patted down before I go in, whilst white people were just swanning by. And at one O bar, because I'm not holding back on them, I got stopped twice and asked what I'm doing here. And it was just, I just felt, I was really scared actually, because the bouncer was huge and just fed up of just like, you're not asking anybody else here. You're asking me, and it just felt rotten.
I think it just washes off me. I think I just take everything as a joke. So I don't if they're being malicious or not, I just, I don't really care.
People fear me because I'm black. I can't. Why that fear comes from, whether it's through personal experiences, whether it be through how I've been raised, and I do believe people fear me because I'm bisexual. They can't pin me down.
Myself and a friend started up Eyes of Colour 5 years ago, and that was after a lot of racism and Islamophobia that we both experienced from the main bi communities. And when we spoke up about this, some people were sympathetic, a lot of people were saying we're too sensitive, and it just ended up feeling very despondent. And so I could either have just said sod it to everybody and just gone off and been completely lonely, Billy no mates again, or I could do something about it. And so me and my friend Camel, we started a safe space for us. And initially, the wider bi community, which was gathered at BiCon, they were not happy about that, saying that we're trying to sort of split the community and we should make do with what we've got. But fortunately, there was enough other people, black and white, who were saying, no, this is a good, positive thing to do. And so, 5 years later on, and we're still going. I wanted to record some oral history about bisexual people of colour. People of colour's history tends to just get washed away anyway. Bisexual people's history tends to get washed away as either gay or straight. So when you put that together, it's like, as soon as I'm gone, are people going to completely forget about that we were ever here? And so I wanted to do something that will capture it, so that we don't just disappear, whether it's in 1 year's time or 100 years' time. People sort of look back and say, oh, there's no such thing as black queer people or black bisexual people, because they're already doing that.
Because I've been able to find people within the BME community, within the black and Asian community, who I can empathise with, other queer black people, I feel stronger myself. I don't feel alone anymore. A lot of people within the BME community are in a way forced into a second closet because they don't. I think because they've had hostility within the wider community. So they've got some people have it from both ends. Have grief from the BME community, have grief from the LGBT community. So in a way, there's no safe space for them. But luckily, there are social groups springing up all the time. I'm a member of two, one in London, one here in the Midlands, for BME people, which has been a lifesaver, godsend. Because it shows that I'm not alone, but there's people who I could talk to when things are getting me down.
I'd love to have a Eyes of Colour conference or a Queer People of Colour conference. That would be fantastic. Bisexuals really do come in all shapes and sizes and colours as well. There is no one bi person, but like most of LGBT, they're always presented as a young, white, slim person. And there's just way, way more to it than that.
Two sides, no in between, began I don't know when. No, you can't confuse the ladies with the men. Each day the frame repeats, we told the story again. In silence and in action, society